Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to put binding onto a quilt that does not have a square corner. It has a bigger than 90-degree angle corner. We already have the table topper done. This is a pattern called Evening Star. We did this in a previous video, and I've made a second one, and it's a Christmas selection. So this one has got a beautiful poinsettia fabric in it. I've already quilted it on the long arm, so now we're ready to put our binding on. The first step is to trim off the excess batting and backing. So you're going to need a straight edge, and you're going to need your rotary cutter. So I'm going to put my rotary cutter right along the edge of my border there. And remember, this might not be perfectly straight because it's been quilted, and so I'm just going to trim off a little bit of excess so I've got a nice straight edge to put the binding on. I always like to put my ruler on top of the quilt and cut rather than cutting from this side, because if you don't hold it steady, you could cut into the quilt. Here, if I don't hold it steady or I veer off, I'm going to veer off into here. I haven't cut my quilt, so it's better to put this over the quilt top. The top is all trimmed. The next step would be to make your binding. I like to use 2.5-inch wide strips. These are cut the width of the fabric, so it's got a little bit of give here, but not too much. I've seamed them all together into one long piece and ironed the seams open, and I have just a very small seam allowance there. You can get less bulk in these seams if you'll do a diagonal seam, but I've found that this really works well enough for my purposes. Now we'll take this over to the sewing machine, and I'll show you how to put the binding on. It's just a little bit different with these larger angles. We're going to line up our binding on the edge of the quilt, and we're going to start about 4 inches from the end there, and we're going to stitch it on with about a 1/4 inch seam. We're going to stop about a 1/4 inch from this corner here, so we're going to stop about right there. You can put a pin in to mark it, and I'm going to back tack. I'm going to sew to that spot, and then I'm going to back tack. Take it off the machine, snip your threads. Let me show you how to do the corners. You need to think of an imaginary line from the tip here towards the center of your table topper. So think of that line there. You want to stitch along here with your binding until you get to that line, and then you want to back tack. So you could just stick a little pin in here to mark it, put your binding down, and then when you're going to come to where that pin is, you want to stop sewing. Another method you can use is to make a little dent with your fingernail. You just need some way to know where to stop. When you get to that line, leave your needle down and back tack. Okay, looks like I'm about right. Now you want to fold your binding back, and this fold should be along that imaginary line. So it looks like I've got it folded a little bit too much there. You want to think of that line towards the center. So think of that line, that's where you fold it. Now fold it again with this edge lined up on here. You'll find that you've got a little tuck there, a little pleat that will fold back and forth. And the line that it's folding on is the line that heads towards the center. So we're going to fold it back this way. You can feel the fold there, and we want to start sewing right here, which is right where we stopped over there. So that's where we're going to start sewing. I'm going to take the pin out before I start. I'm going to put my needle in. Back tack to that spot and then keep going. We're coming to another corner, so think again of where my pin is as an imaginary line heading towards the center. You can see your corner there. We could just stick the pin in if we want. And I'm going to stitch right to the pin. When you get there, stop and leave your needle down. Remove your pin and back tack a little. Make a fold with the fold again pointing towards the center. Fold it again with this edge lined up. So you've got that tuck there. Then start sewing. You can feel with your fingernail where that fold is. You can put a pin there if you want. That's where you're going to start sewing. Put the needle down. Take your pin out. Sew a little bit and back tack. You might have to feed the flywheel by hand so you don't back tack too far. We've come to the last side here. We've got this tail here. We've got this tail here. I'm going to cut off some of the excess there. Now you want to feed this forward fairly snugly, pulling it a little bit taut, and then same thing here, and you want to make a little mark where they're overlapping a 1/2 inch, because I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to trim it there. Now we're going to open these up, and we're just going to take make a little seam right here. 1/4 inch, line them up. I like to finger press these seams open, so I'm going to flatten it and just use the back of my fingernails and finger press it open. Then we're going to refold it, and I also like to re-finger press that part. Now it fits just exactly. If you found that you didn't take your seam big enough and you've got too much binding there, just go back and stitch it with a little bit bigger seam allowance. Now we'll just sew this last little bit on. Now the binding is all the way on. I'm going to finger press with the back of my fingernail this seam nice and flat. So I'm pulling it away and then drawing my fingernail down hard along the seam. When you come to a seam in the binding, like right here, it's a little bit thicker, so you really want to pull it away and give that a nice firm finger press. Now we're going to turn our binding to the back side of the table topper. We're just going to fold it over all these raw edges here, and we are going to stitch from the top in the ditch, and it's going to stitch that in place. If you prefer to hand stitch at this point, you can. I never have enough time for that, so let's just do this on the machine. I'm going to use black thread on the top because I'm in the ditch, but I'm really on the black part. On the back side here, it's important to match your binding, so I could use the black thread. That would be fine. Or I could switch to a red. I think the red shows less, so I'm going to switch to a red thread there. I'm folding my binding right over the edge, and then I'm going to stitch from the top. So you want this folded firmly over the edge. You don't want your binding baggy or loose. You want it all the way folded so it's snug. And then just stitch right in the ditch. So I'm going to fold it back, hold it, and stitch in the ditch. You can use pins or clips if you like, but I find that cutting at 2.5 inches, folding it back is about perfect. And we will end up with a nice seam. Right here, you can see it. We've got a really nice seam right along the edge there, and it's sewn on there very securely. That will not come off. We're coming to the corner here, so let me show you how to fold this back to get a nice neat corner. Fold this side down for a couple of inches right along where you want it to go. Hold it with your left hand, and you're going to have a little point right there, and that's what you want to fold to the back side there, and you want that angle to be along that same imaginary line that we thought of earlier. And then the top is going to do the same thing. And we're going to hold it and stitch in the ditch. Stop when you get there, leave the needle down, lift your presser foot, and turn everything. Keep holding here, and then keep going. You can see how nice and neat that corner folded. That's what you want, is a nice fold right there, going to the corner, and the same thing on the back side. Now we'll continue on the rest of the table topper all the way around. Now when you turn this to the back, sometimes you can't get this side very neat, but here's a little hint. If you don't like the fold you've got there, you can put a pin in, and I'm just going between the layers there, and I'm going to pull it out to the angle I want it at. That's the angle I want. Now we'll sew it. Much better. When I'm done stitching, I always flip it over, and I'm going to check all the way around all the edges to make sure that I have actually caught the binding everywhere. Because we are sewing from the top, you're sewing a little bit blind. So I'm just going to draw my finger all the way around and make sure that I am stitching in the binding. It is possible that if you don't turn it far enough, you might not have caught a spot. That's okay. Just turn it back, stitch it, get it corrected. All right, this one looks really good. I've got the table topper all done, and it really turned out nice. And I'm real surprised at how different this looks than the one I made last time. So come on over to our shop and I'll show you how that one turned out. I've got the binding all the way around the table topper, got it all steam pressed, all finished, looks really good. You can see the back side, it's got a nice contrast color there. Here's another colorway here. Looks completely different. Again, got that contrast binding all the way around the edges. Hope you enjoyed our video today on binding with a larger than 90-degree angles. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we welcome your questions and your comments.